The boardroom glittered with glass and arrogance. Sunlight streamed across the polished table where the billionaire stood, his fists planted like roots of fury. His voice thundered, echoing off the windows as he accused his assistant of sabotaging a multi-million-dollar deal. Every face around the table froze. Investors, journalists, and employees, all watching the man who owned their paychecks dismantle someone's dignity. Across from him, Emma trembled, but didn't step back. "Do you realize what you've done?" he roared, his reflection shimmering in the glass behind her like a beast of his own making. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, whispers spread like wildfire. Emma tried to explain, her voice shaking, hands clasped together, but he cut her off with a sneer. "Incompetent, untrustworthy, replaceable." Each word landed like a slap, each echo sealing her fate. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of him. The entire room watched as she struggled to steady her breathing, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own defense. Somewhere deep down, she still hoped he would stop, that he would remember the years she'd given to his empire. Instead, he turned away, disgusted. "You're done here," he said, before storming out under a chorus of murmurs and flashing lights. And just like that, Emma's life shattered in front of the world. Her knees buckled as she sank into her chair, the city skyline behind her blurring through tears. Around the table, no one spoke. Some pitied her, others simply looked away. Shame hung heavy in the air, a silent sentence that would follow her long after that door closed, but not everyone believed what they saw. At the far end of the room, near the wall of windows, the billionaire's son sat in silence. Daniel had watched every second of the confrontation, his expression unreadable. He'd seen his father's temper before, but this time something was off. The rage felt rehearsed, too clean, too public. He stood up slowly as the room began to empty. His father's reputation had always been built on control, never losing his composure, never showing weakness. Yet what Daniel saw wasn't control. It was fear, the kind that hides behind anger, the kind that tries to bury guilt before it's found. If you were standing in that room, watching someone destroy another person's career to protect their pride, what would you do? Would you stay silent like everyone else, or would you dare to speak the truth? Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments, would you stand up for someone who's being humiliated in public? Now let's go back, before the shouting, before the cameras, to the moment when everything started to unravel. The morning had begun like any other at Sterling Enterprises. Polished shoes on marble floors, assistants whispering over coffee, screens flashing numbers that meant millions. Emma had arrived early, as always, with files organized, agenda ready, and a quiet smile that masked exhaustion. To her, today was just another meeting, until she caught a strange look in her boss's eyes, one she couldn't quite name. The tension started small. A misplaced document, a sudden change in tone, a phone call cut short. Emma brushed it off, unaware that the storm was already forming. Behind closed doors, the billionaire had made a costly mistake, one that could destroy his empire if discovered, and now he needed someone to blame. As Emma prepared the presentation, Daniel watched from the corner of the room, sensing the unease. His father's charm was still there, but his patience was gone. The meeting would start in minutes, and so would the performance that would change all their lives. And when the cameras turned on, so did the mask. The billionaire smiled for the investors, then turned, and the world witnessed his wrath. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of Sterling Enterprises, catching the golden letters of the billionaire's name, etched on every surface. The building gleamed like a monument to perfection, flawless, cold, and untouchable. Outside, cameras still lingered, capturing his confident stride as he arrived for work. The headlines called him the visionary who holds Wall Street's future. But behind that title lay a man terrified of being ordinary. Inside, employees straightened their backs and lowered their voices as he passed. His empire ran on fear disguised as respect. He smiled for the cameras, but his eyes darted from person to person, measuring, judging, controlling. Emma's desk was empty now, cleared overnight as if she had never existed. A whisper ran through the floor. "She's gone." In his office, high above the skyline, the billionaire stood before the window. Admiring the world he built, he didn't see people, only assets, data, results. He told himself Emma's dismissal was necessary, a show of strength to maintain order. But somewhere deep down, the echo of her broken voice still lingered. He silenced it with a sip of expensive whiskey and the click of a news channel praising his leadership. Daniel entered quietly, his reflection merging with his father's in the glass. "Good work yesterday," the billionaire said, not turning around. His voice was smooth but hollow. Daniel forced a nod, unsure whether to feel disgust or pity. Every word from his father sounded rehearsed, like lines from a play he'd been performing his whole life. They stood there for a moment, two men separated by silence. Daniel had grown up watching that empire rise from nothing, built brick by brick out of ambition and sacrifice. He admired it once. Now he saw the cracks, not in the walls, but in the man himself. Power had become his father's only language, and apologies had been erased from his vocabulary long ago. As Daniel left the office, whispers followed him too. Some said he was next in line to inherit the empire. Others said he wasn't ruthless enough to deserve it. He walked through the halls lined with awards, remembering Emma's kindness, the way she used to leave coffee on his desk when his father forgot his birthday. Now, her name was spoken like a curse. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The replay of yesterday's humiliation haunted him. Every second of it, his father's rage, Emma's trembling hands, the silence of those who watched, looped in his mind like a broken film reel. He tried to tell himself it was over, but he knew it wasn't. Something inside him whispered that the truth had been buried too quickly. He got up, grabbed his jacket, and drove back to the building under the cover of darkness. The city lights shimmered across his windshield, reflections of a world built on illusions. Inside Sterling Enterprises, the halls were empty, the air humming with quiet secrets. He made his way to the security department, heart pounding. Daniel hesitated at the door marked "Restricted Access." He shouldn't be there. But conscience is louder than fear. He swiped his badge and stepped inside, rows of monitors flickering in the dark. Somewhere among those recordings lay the truth his father had erased. The empire looked perfect from the outside. But tonight, Daniel was about to find the first crack in its foundation. By morning, the internet had already chosen its villain. A video clip, short, sharp, and cruelly edited, flooded every platform. The billionaire stood tall and righteous. Emma looked careless, defensive, and small. The captions read, "Employee sabotages deal. Billionaire exposes her in front of everyone." Views climbed by the millions, fueled by outrage and gossip. In the video, Emma's explanations were cut mid-sentence. Her voice cracked, but the edit made it sound like guilt. The truth, that she was following a direct order, vanished under music and dramatic slow motion. Comment sections turned into public execution grounds. "She deserved it," some wrote. "Fire her forever," said others. At home, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the glowing screen. Her name was trending worldwide. The same people who once admired her now mocked her without mercy. Her phone buzzed with messages she couldn't bear to open, some from strangers, some from friends pretending to care. The tears came quietly, not from shame, but from disbelief. On the other side of the city, the billionaire was giving interviews. "Accountability is essential to leadership," he declared, wearing that same polished smile. Cameras loved him. He knew exactly how to play them. He spoke of company values and trust, never once mentioning Emma's name. Behind the scenes, his PR team ensured the clip stayed viral. The empire had a new hero and a new scapegoat. Daniel watched it unfold from his apartment, his laptop screen reflecting the chaos. The comments blurred together, a chorus of cruelty. He remembered the look in Emma's eyes, the kind that only appears when truth is dying in plain sight. His stomach turned. Something about the video felt too perfect, too edited, too convenient. He knew what manipulation looked like. After all, he'd grown up watching it. He opened a browser tab and searched for the full recording of the meeting, but all he found were press versions, polished, trimmed, controlled. The company's official account had locked the original footage, for internal use only. That phrase repeated in his head like a taunt. His father had always believed in controlling the narrative. This time, he'd perfected it. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, his father's head of security. "Keep your nose out of it. The old man's not happy." He stared at the screen, pulse quickening. Marcus had always been loyal to his father, but the warning carried something darker: fear. Daniel exhaled, his hands trembling slightly. He knew he was getting close to something he wasn't supposed to see. Meanwhile, Emma's world shrank to silence. She stayed inside, curtains drawn, afraid to face the looks of strangers. Her inbox filled with hate mail and fake apologies from colleagues. The company had already locked her out of every system. She didn't even have a chance to defend herself. She turned off her phone, but the noise didn't stop. It lived inside her head now. That night, Daniel couldn't stand it anymore. He stared at his reflection in the dark window, the same skyline his father ruled. The empire looked magnificent from up here, but now he could see the rot beneath the shine. He whispered to himself, "If no one else will find the truth, I will." And with that promise, Daniel made his decision. He grabbed his access card, slipped on his jacket, and headed back to the place where it all happened. The world had seen one version of the story, but the real footage was still waiting to be found. The office was still dark when Daniel arrived, long before sunrise. The silence felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. He moved through the empty halls, his footsteps echoing off marble floors, once filled with noise and power. The screens were asleep, the city outside still wearing its coat of night. For the first time, Sterling Enterprises didn't look unstoppable. It looked haunted. He passed Emma's desk, the one now stripped bare. Only a faint ring remained where her coffee cup used to sit. It was such a small thing, but it made his chest tighten. She had been more than an assistant. She was the heartbeat that kept his father's chaos organized. And now she was gone, erased from the building like she'd never existed. In his father's office, the smell of cologne and expensive leather lingered. On the wall hung framed magazine covers. "The Man Who Can't Fail," "The King of Wall Street," "The Future of Leadership." Daniel stared at them, each headline suddenly feeling like a lie carved in gold. He sat in his father's chair, feeling the cold leather beneath his palms, and whispered to himself, how many people did he step on to stay there? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door opening. Marcus, his father's head of security, walked in. His face was tired, his tone colder than usual. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel," he said. "Your father doesn't like questions, especially now." Daniel forced a polite smile, replying softly, "I'm not asking questions, Marcus. I'm looking for answers." Marcus hesitated, studying him with a look that mixed pity and warning. "Curiosity's a dangerous thing in this family," he muttered before walking away. His footsteps faded down the hall, leaving Daniel alone with the hum of the air conditioning and the thud of his own heartbeat. He turned toward the screen on his father's desk, the company's internal security portal, and exhaled. He typed in his access credentials. The monitor flickered to life, revealing a web of camera feeds and digital files. Each one was tagged by date, location, and meeting ID. Daniel's hands hovered over the keyboard. He knew what he was looking for, the boardroom footage. But he also knew that opening it would be crossing a line his father would never forgive. The cursor blinked, daring him to continue. He opened the folder labeled Archived Meetings. Rows of files appeared, all encrypted, all secured. Daniel frowned. His father had always been paranoid, but this level of secrecy was new. He entered the override code he'd once seen Marcus use. The system hesitated, then clicked open. His pulse spiked. He was in. He found the file marked with yesterday's date. Board meeting, Project Helios. The same one that had gone viral online. He clicked it. The video began to load, but this time it wasn't the edited version the world had seen. It was longer, uncut, raw. Daniel leaned closer, heart pounding in his ears. "Come on," he whispered. "Show me the truth." The footage began. The same boardroom, the same people, but the tone was different before the explosion. His father's voice was calm, even casual. He gave Emma a direct order, one that contradicted everything he'd later accused her of. Daniel froze. He couldn't believe it. Every second that played on the screen rewrote everything he thought he knew. By the time the video ended, his hands were shaking. He sat back in the chair, the glow of the monitor washing over his pale face. His father hadn't made a mistake. He had lied. Deliberately, publicly, ruthlessly. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the realization settled. His father had framed Emma to protect himself. And now Daniel held the proof that could destroy the empire, or his family, forever. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the servers. Daniel sat motionless, the glow of the monitor painting his face in blue light. On screen, his father's words echoed again, calm, deliberate, unmistakable. "Emma, execute the deal exactly as I instructed." Then came the twist, the moment when he turned on her, rewriting reality in front of everyone. Daniel felt sick. His chest tightened as the truth clawed at his conscience. He leaned closer, watching the small details he had missed before, the flicker of panic in his father's eyes, the hesitation before his outburst, the subtle glance toward the cameras. It wasn't anger, it was calculation. Every insult, every accusation, every word had been part of a performance. His father hadn't lost control. He had orchestrated the entire scene. Daniel whispered, "He framed her." He scrubbed back through the footage, searching for context, something to make sense of it. In one corner of the room, an intern shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing something wrong. No one spoke. They all knew better. The billionaire's empire thrived on silence. Daniel clenched his fists. That silence had destroyed an innocent woman's life. He copied the unedited video onto a flash drive. The act felt small but dangerous, like lighting a match in a room full of gas. His palms were sweating as the progress bar crawled forward. He glanced at the door, half expecting Marcus or a security guard to appear, but no one came. The empire was asleep, and for once its secrets were unguarded. When the file finally transferred, Daniel pulled the drive from the port and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The weight of it felt heavier than gold. He looked around the control room, walls lined with screens showing every floor of the company. It was like staring into a living organism built on power, deceit, and fear. For the first time, he saw it for what it truly was, a prison disguised as success. As he turned to leave, the monitor flashed red. Access logged. Admin alert. His stomach dropped. The system had detected his entry. "Damn it," he muttered, fumbling for his badge. Alarms didn't go off, but he knew his father's tech team would see it soon. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before the system reported his name. Daniel sprinted down the hallway, every step echoing louder than it should. His heart hammered as he reached the elevator, pressing the button again and again. The doors opened slowly, mockingly. Inside, the lights flickered, reflecting his anxious face in steel. "Come on," he whispered, "just close." The doors slid shut, sealing him in with his fear. As the elevator descended, he looked at the flash drive in his hand, that tiny object holding the power to destroy everything his father had built. He thought about Emma, sitting alone somewhere, branded a failure by the man she had trusted most. The injustice burned inside him, stronger than fear. He swore silently that she would be vindicated. When he stepped into the underground parking lot, the city lights gleamed beyond the tinted glass. The world outside still believed in the myth of the perfect billionaire. Only Daniel now knew the truth behind the mask, and he carried it with him in his pocket. He paused beside his car, staring out into the night. "If I release this," he murmured, "I lose my father. But if I don't, I lose myself." He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away from the tower that had raised him. Behind him, the empire kept shining, a palace of lies lit from within. But every empire, he thought, has a crack, and this one had just begun to break. Daniel parked a few blocks from his apartment and sat, motionless, the city's hum muffled by the car's interior. The flash drive rested on the passenger seat, a tiny object with the weight of a confession. He could still hear his father's voice, echoing through the footage, confident, manipulative, untouchable. The truth was no longer a mystery, it was a burden, and now it was his alone to carry. He leaned back, closing his eyes, trying to slow his racing thoughts. Every breath felt heavy, every second louder than the last. The world outside kept moving, people laughing, cars honking, screens glowing, unaware that one family's lie had shaped their belief in success. He imagined Emma sitting alone somewhere, reading the comments that tore her apart. A lump rose in his throat. Back at his apartment, the silence was unbearable. The flash drive lay on the kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. Daniel poured himself a drink, but it didn't help. He kept pacing, mind spinning between loyalty and justice. His father's voice echoed in memory. Family first. Always. But what did family mean when its foundation was deceit? He turned on the TV. News anchors praised the billionaire's decisive leadership, replaying the same doctored clip over and over. Each repetition made Daniel's skin crawl. He muted the screen, unable to listen any longer. He wasn't sure what made him angrier, his father's lie or the world's willingness to believe it. Maybe both. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and inserted the flash drive. The video loaded again, raw and unfiltered. Emma's face appeared, trembling, terrified, yet earnest. Daniel paused the frame, staring into her eyes. He could see the moment. Her trust shattered, the exact second his father decided her reputation was expendable. "You didn't deserve this," he whispered. For a moment, he imagined confronting his father, walking into the office, slamming the flash drive on the desk, demanding the truth. But then he saw the headlines that would follow. "Billionaire's son betrays his own father. He'd be exiled, ridiculed, erased. The man who taught him everything would destroy him without hesitation." Daniel knew it. His father didn't lose gracefully. The phone rang. His father's name lit up the screen. Daniel froze. He couldn't bring himself to answer. The call went to voicemail, then another, and another. Finally, a text appeared. We need to talk. Now. Daniel stared at the message, his pulse quickening. Did his father already know? Had Marcus seen the access log? The walls felt like they were closing in. He grabbed his jacket and stepped out onto the balcony, the cold air biting his skin. The city stretched endlessly below, thousands of windows, each hiding its own secret. He thought about how many people his father had deceived, how many lies had been told to keep the empire shining. The weight of truth pressed on him until he could barely breathe. For years he had lived in his father's shadow, pretending not to see the cost of perfection. But now ignorance was no longer an option. Every moral line his father had crossed stood before him, illuminated by that one piece of evidence in his pocket. Daniel realized something terrifying. The truth doesn't just expose others. It demands you expose yourself too. He turned off the TV, pocketed the flash drive, and stared at his reflection in the dark glass. "If I stay silent," he murmured, "I become him." The decision was no longer about family or revenge. It was about redemption. He knew what he had to do. The truth had found its witness, and it would not rest quietly. Rain poured over the city that night, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon. Daniel stood outside Emma's apartment building, drenched and uncertain. For hours he had driven aimlessly, the flash drive burning in his pocket like a secret begging to be set free. He didn't have a plan, only a need to make things right. Finally, he took a deep breath and buzzed her door. The intercom crackled. "Who is it?" Her voice was cautious, weary. "It's Daniel," he said. A long silence followed before the door unlocked with a faint click. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing with doubt. When she opened the door, her eyes were red and tired. She looked smaller somehow, as if the world had taken pieces of her with every headline. The apartment was dimly lit, cluttered with unopened mail and cold teacups. A laptop sat on the couch, the viral video paused mid-frame. His father's face. Frozen in manufactured rage, Daniel's throat tightened. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, folding her arms as if to shield herself. "If your father finds out—" "I'm not here for him," Daniel interrupted softly. "I'm here for you." He pulled the flash drive from his pocket and held it out. "This is the unedited footage. It proves you were following his orders." Emma blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Daniel plugged it into her laptop. The real video began to play. The calm conversation before the storm, the moment his father gave her the instruction, the manufactured outrage that followed. Emma's hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled as she whispered, He knew it wasn't my fault." When the video ended, the room was silent except for the sound of rain hitting the window. Emma sat down slowly, staring at the screen. "He ruined me," she said, voice trembling. "I can't go anywhere without people recognizing me. They look at me like I'm filth." Daniel crouched beside her. "You didn't deserve this. He used you to protect his image." His words felt heavy but necessary. Emma looked up at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "Because someone has to, and because I can't let him get away with it." His voice cracked slightly. It wasn't just anger he felt, it was guilt. She nodded slowly, understanding more than he said aloud. "You could lose everything," she warned. "Your job, your father, your future." Daniel met her eyes. "If I keep quiet, I lose myself." There was no hesitation in his tone, only quiet conviction. He had grown up in a house where silence was strength, but now, breaking that silence was the only act of courage that mattered. Emma reached for the flash drive and turned it in her hand, as though holding a fragile piece of justice. "What will you do with it?" she asked. Daniel exhaled, glancing toward the rain-soaked city beyond the window. "I'm going to tell the truth," he said, "even if I have to do it anonymously." For the first time in days, Emma's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Then maybe," she whispered, "there's still hope." They sat in silence, the storm outside fading into a soft drizzle. The flash drive glowed faintly under the lamp, a small, shining symbol of defiance. As Daniel left her apartment, the air felt different, lighter, electric, alive. He knew what he had set in motion couldn't be undone. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, low and ominous. But this time, he didn't flinch. The storm wasn't coming for him anymore. He was the one bringing it. The city didn't sleep that night. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, a single file began its silent journey through the web. Daniel sat at his desk, hood up, face lit by the glow of his laptop. The cursor blinked beside a file name that could topple. An Empire, Sterling Board Meeting Uncut, MP4. His hands trembled slightly as he hit upload. There was no turning back now. The file moved slowly, percentage by percentage. Each second felt like an hour. Outside, the rain had stopped, but thunder still rolled in the distance. When the upload hit 100%, Daniel leaned back, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the screen. He had done it. The truth was out. A new anonymous account, one no one could trace, carried the footage into the light. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. People compared it to the original clip, noticing every lie, every manipulation. "Wait, he told her to do it," someone commented. "They cut this part out," another wrote. "She was framed." Hashtags began to rise. News outlets started calling it the Sterling Scandal. For the first time, the narrative shifted, and Emma's name was no longer a punchline. Emma woke up to her phone buzzing non-stop. At first, she didn't dare look, but when she finally opened her messages, she froze. "You have to see this," one read. It was the full video. Her hands shook as she pressed play. The truth unfolded before her eyes, unfiltered, undeniable. The same world that had condemned her was now apologizing. Meanwhile, in the skyscraper that bore the Sterling name, chaos was awakening. The Billionaire's PR team flooded the office before sunrise. Screens flashed headlines, reporters called non-stop, and social media feeds screamed his name. "Sir, this is bad," one advisor stammered. "The footage looks real." The Billionaire's jaw tightened. "Find out who leaked it, now." Daniel sat in his apartment, watching the reaction unfold in real time. News anchors questioned the Billionaire's ethics. Influencers dissected the video frame by frame. The empire that once looked invincible was cracking under the weight of its own lie. Daniel's phone buzzed again. A message from Emma. "You did this, didn't you?" He stared at the words, unable to reply. Across the city, the billionaire watched his world unravel. The man who prided himself on control was losing it in front of millions. His statement denying wrongdoing only fanned the flames. Every word he spoke was met with evidence from the leaked video. His empire, once built on trust and fear, was collapsing under the truth. Emma stood by her window, sunlight finally breaking through grey clouds. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. Her inbox was now filled with support, people demanding her reinstatement, calling her brave, even heroic. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had barely survived. And yet, deep down, she was grateful, not just for the truth, but for the man who had risked everything to reveal it. Daniel watched her name trend again, but this time it was different. Justice for Emma. Sterling lies. But as the world was finally seeing what he had seen all along, his father would find out, and when he did, there would be nowhere to hide. Still, a faint smile crossed Daniel's face. For once, he had done something his father never could, the right thing. By nightfall, Every news channel was running the story. Stock prices began to fall, investors demanded answers, and Sterling Enterprises' pristine image shattered overnight. Cameras surrounded the company's headquarters, reporters shouting. Questions that no one dared answer. The truth had escaped its cage, and it was devouring everything in its path. And somewhere, deep inside the storm he had unleashed, Daniel felt both terrified and free. The truth was finally out there, unstoppable, irreversible, but he also knew this was only the beginning. The empire would fight back, and his father would come for him. The leak was not the end of the story. It was the spark that would set the rest ablaze. By sunrise, Sterling Enterprises was in freefall. The once pristine skyscraper, all glass, steel and ego, now pulsed with chaos. Phones rang endlessly, reporters crowded the lobby, and employees whispered in panicked tones. The leaked video had exposed everything, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. Inside the top floor, the billionaire's empire trembled for the first time. "Find the source!" the billionaire shouted, slamming his hand on the conference table. His face was flushed, his voice breaking under the weight of rage. "Lock down every device, every IP. I want names." His advisors exchanged wary glances, terrified to speak. They knew the truth. It was already too late. Once the truth hits the internet, it never goes back to sleep. Screens all around the room replayed the footage, his own voice giving the order, his own betrayal caught in high definition. He couldn't look at it. "Fake," he muttered. "It's fake." But even he didn't believe it. His reflection in the glass windows looked smaller now, older, haunted. The man who once ruled with absolute control was finally facing a force he couldn't manipulate: reality. Downstairs, employees gathered in clusters, watching the news coverage on their phones. "Did you see it? It's real." He set her up. For years they'd feared the man whose shadow filled the building. Now that shadow was breaking apart. Some felt pity, most felt relief. Justice, long overdue, had finally found its way through the cracks. Daniel arrived later that morning, heart pounding as he stepped into the chaos he had created. His father's assistants brushed past him, frantic, avoiding eye contact. The tension was suffocating. Everywhere he looked, screens screamed headlines about the scandal. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, all asking the same question. "Do you know who leaked it?" He deleted them all. He reached his office, shut the door, and leaned against it. The noise outside felt distant, like a storm heard from underwater. On his desk lay a single note from Marcus. "He's onto you." Daniel's breath caught. He walked to the window, staring down at the swarm of journalists gathering below. He had expected this moment, but not the dread that came with it. His father wouldn't rest until he found the traitor. Meanwhile, Emma sat in a cafe across town, watching the same news play out. Strangers whispered her name, this time with respect. "That's her," someone said. "She was innocent." For the first time, the world saw her truth. She didn't know Daniel had risked everything for her, not yet. But something told her the leak hadn't been an accident. Somewhere, someone had finally done what was right. Back at headquarters, the billionaire's fury turned to paranoia. "Shut it down," he barked. "Every interview, every statement, cancel everything." His PR team scrambled to obey, but the damage was irreversible. Stock prices plunged, sponsors vanished, and investors demanded an emergency meeting. "You can't spin this," one advisor whispered. "It's over." The billionaire glared at him. "Nothing's over," he said coldly. "Not until I say it is." Daniel watched from the hallway as his father passed by, surrounded by lawyers and panic. Their eyes met for a second, just long enough for Daniel to see suspicion flicker behind his father's glare. That single look said everything. "I know it was you." Daniel's heart sank. He turned away before his father could speak, the air between them electric with unspoken truth. That evening, The city skyline burned orange against the setting sun. The empire still stood, but it no longer shined. In every reflection, Daniel saw the faces of those his father had crushed to build it. The storm he'd unleashed was growing, unstoppable, and he was caught in its eye. He whispered to himself, "This is what truth looks like, loud, messy, and impossible to contain." The storm had reached its peak. By the end of the day, Sterling Enterprises was drowning in scandal. Reporters swarmed the building, shouting questions that no one dared answer. Inside the glass tower, meetings turned into shouting matches, and once loyal executives were quietly preparing their exits. But on the top floor, behind a door that had always been closed to everyone, the real explosion was about to begin. Daniel stood outside his father's office, staring at the frosted glass. The voices inside were muffled but angry, his father barking orders, Marcus trying to calm him. Daniel's stomach twisted. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. When the shouting stopped, silence filled the corridor, thick and electric. Then came the words he'd been dreading. "Send him in." The billionaire stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the fading skyline. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked without turning. Daniel said nothing. His father turned slowly, his eyes dark and sharp, like polished steel. "Someone leaked a private recording, someone inside this family." He paused, watching Daniel's every breath. "Do you have something to tell me?" Daniel forced himself to meet his father's gaze. "No," he said quietly. "I don't." His father's smile was thin and dangerous. "That's disappointing." He walked closer, his footsteps echoing like a countdown. "You know what loyalty means, Daniel? It means silence. It means protecting what we've built, no matter the cost." His tone grew colder. "I raised you to understand that." "Maybe that's the problem," Daniel replied before he could stop himself. His father froze. "What did you say?" Daniel's heart pounded, but the words kept coming. "You taught me loyalty, but never honesty. You care more about your image than the people you destroy to keep it." The air crackled with tension. His father's jaw tightened. "Watch your words, son," he hissed. "You have no idea what this world demands." "Oh, I do," Daniel said softly. "It demands lies, and you've given it plenty." For a moment, neither moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside. Then, in one swift motion, his father slammed his fist on the desk. "You think you know everything? You're a child playing with matches," he shouted. "You leak that video, and you burn with me." Daniel didn't flinch. "Maybe it's time something burned," he said. His voice was calm now, almost eerily so. His father's face turned red with fury. "Get out," he growled, "before I forget you're my son." The words hit harder than any slap could. Daniel turned toward the door, his pulse hammering in his ears, but before leaving he said quietly, "You already have." When the door slammed shut behind him, the billionaire stood motionless. The office was silent, but his reflection trembled in the glass. He saw a man, surrounded by everything he'd ever wanted, power, wealth, respect, yet utterly alone. For the first time, he realized the one thing he couldn't control had finally turned against him, his own blood. Daniel walked down the corridor, his chest tight, his hands shaking. He'd stood up to the man who had defined his world, and somehow that felt like both victory and loss. Outside, the first flashes of lightning lit the night sky. He stepped into the elevator and whispered to himself, "There's no going back now." The storm wasn't over. It was just changing shape. The world didn't wait for apologies. By morning, the scandal had consumed every screen, every feed, every conversation. News anchors dissected the billionaire's downfall like surgeons over a corpse. "New evidence suggests a pattern of deception," one headline read. Sterling empire on the brink, said another. The ice story had grown larger than any of them, larger even than truth itself. Across social media, the tide had turned. Emma's name, once a symbol of shame, now represented courage. People demanded justice, her reinstatement, her dignity. Hashtags became movements, interviews became protests, and for the first time in years, the world questioned the myth of the perfect billionaire. Truth had found its audience, and it refused to be ignored. Inside his mansion, the billionaire sat in darkness, surrounded by silence and shattered glass. The TV flickered with images of his own face, once adored, now dissected with disgust. His phone buzzed with calls from board members, lawyers, and journalists, all demanding answers he didn't have. The empire he had built over decades was now crumbling in days. The king had become the villain. Meanwhile, Emma's phone was ringing too, but with kindness this time. Former co-workers, journalists, even strangers reached out to apologize. Some offered her jobs, others simply offered their respect. She didn't know what to say. Each message brought tears, not of pain, but of relief. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen again, heard, believed. Daniel watched it all from a distance, his face hidden behind a pair of dark glasses. He had gone quiet online, knowing his father's people were still searching for the source. But seeing Emma smile again, even briefly, made every risk worth it. The truth had done what he couldn't. It had set someone free. Yet deep down, he knew the war wasn't over. Not while his father still held power. In the heart of the city, protests formed outside Sterling Enterprises. People held signs reading "Accountability for all" and "No one above the truth." Reporters filled the sidewalks, their cameras pointed at the building that once symbolized untouchable success. Inside, executives whispered about resignations, lawsuits, and investigations. The empire was bleeding from the inside out. Daniel received a text from an unknown number. "He's looking for you." He froze. The world might have turned against his father, but the man himself was still dangerous. Power doesn't disappear. It adapts, it fights, it bites back. Daniel locked his phone and looked out the window. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass, as if the world itself was holding its breath. At that same moment, Emma was invited to appear on a live news broadcast. The host called her the woman who stood against corporate cruelty. She hesitated, but agreed. When she stepped into the studio, the lights blinded her for a second, but then she looked into the camera and spoke, calm, sincere, brave. "I didn't want revenge," she said. "I just wanted the truth." The audience went silent. Her words spread faster than any headline. People shared her clip, calling her a voice of integrity in a world built on lies. Daniel watched from his apartment, his eyes wet with quiet pride. This was what he wanted. Not his father's destruction, but her redemption. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that his father was already plotting his next move. That night, as the world celebrated justice, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood on his balcony, city lights stretching endlessly below. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, his father was still awake, planning. The empire was cracking, but it hadn't yet fallen, and Daniel knew one thing for certain. Before it did, his father would come for him. The boardroom was empty that night, silent, sterile, and cold. The same room where Emma's life had been destroyed now stood still, haunted by ghosts of humiliation and lies. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the city like a stage set for reckoning. Daniel stood by the window, waiting. He knew his father would come. He always did. The door opened with a sharp click. The billionaire stepped inside, his suit immaculate despite the chaos of his world. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt thick enough to cut. "You've caused quite a storm," his father said finally, his voice calm, too calm. "It's over," Daniel replied. "The truth is out." His father's lips curled into a faint smile. "Truth," he repeated, almost amused. "You think the world cares about truth? It cares about control, about who speaks loudest." He walked closer, his reflection blending with Daniel's in the glass. "You've embarrassed this family. You've betrayed your own blood." Daniel's voice cracked with quiet defiance. "You betrayed something greater. Decency." For the first time, the billionaire looked old. The mask of confidence slipped just slightly. "Everything I did for this family," he said. "To protect our name, our legacy." Daniel shook his head. "No, you did it to protect yourself." The silence that followed was suffocating. Two men bound by blood, torn apart by values neither could abandon. The billionaire turned away, gripping the edge of the table where he had once stood as a god among mortals. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he whispered. "You've destroyed everything we built." Daniel stepped closer. "We didn't build anything, Dad. You built an illusion. I just turned on the lights." His father's shoulders tensed, but he didn't look back. When he finally did, his eyes burned with a mixture of fury and grief. "You think you've won," he said, "but the world forgets fast. They'll move on, and when they do, I'll rebuild. Without you." His words carried the same cold certainty that had once ruled boardrooms and lives. But Daniel saw something underneath it. Fear. His father wasn't angry because he'd lost power. He was angry because he'd lost control. "You'll rebuild," Daniel said softly, "but not the same empire and not with the same lies." He took the flash drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Keep it. Watch it. Remember what you did." His father stared at the small device as if it were a weapon. "You think this means anything?" he sneered. "You think exposing me changes the world?" Daniel's eyes were calm. "Maybe not, but it changes me." Lightning flashed again, splitting the sky in two. The thunder rolled through the silence like applause after tragedy. The billionaire sank into a chair, exhausted, defeated, staring at the table that had once been his throne. Daniel stood across from him, no longer the boy who sought approval, but the man who chose integrity over inheritance. For the first time in years, his father looked at him, really looked. "You have no idea what it's like to lose everything," he said quietly. Daniel's voice softened. "You're wrong. I just lost my father." The words hit harder than any accusation. His father lowered his gaze, the fight leaving him like air escaping a balloon. The empire outside might still bear his name, but its soul now belonged to the truth. Daniel turned toward the door. He didn't wait for forgiveness, and his father didn't ask for it. As he walked away, thunder echoed again, shaking the glass walls around them. The world outside was still storming, but inside, something had finally broken. The confrontation wasn't just between father and son, it was between lies and conscience had finally spoken. The morning after their confrontation, the world awoke to headlines that left no room for doubt. Sterling under investigation. Fraud, manipulation, and cover-ups, the truth behind the empire. Cameras surrounded the billionaire's mansion, drones hovered over the gates, and reporters camped on sidewalks. The man who once shaped markets with a word could no longer control his own story. The empire had finally turned on its master. Inside, the billionaire sat in silence, staring at his phone. Every call brought bad news. Partners pulling out, sponsors cutting ties, lawyers resigning. The stock had dropped 30% overnight. He'd built his fortune on perception, and now perception was his executioner. For the first time in his life, the silence of power was replaced by the noise of consequence. Daniel watched the chaos from afar. He hadn't spoken to his father since that night. Part of him wanted to feel relief, but what he felt instead was hollow. Justice never felt as clean as he imagined. He walked through the city streets unnoticed, just another face among millions, while his last name burned across every screen. Freedom, it turned out, had its own kind of loneliness. Emma, meanwhile, was learning to breathe again. The news had confirmed what the world already knew. She had been innocent all along. Invitations poured in, interviews, job offers, speaking events. But she turned most of them down. She didn't want fame, she wanted peace. Sitting by her window with a cup of tea, she finally allowed herself to smile without fear. The billionaire's mansion, once a fortress, now felt like a museum of arrogance. Reporters shouted from beyond the gates, flashes of light bursting through the iron bars. "Do you have anything to say?" they yelled. But he had nothing left to give. Not words, not excuses. He'd spent his life talking, commanding, explaining. Now, silence was all that remained. Daniel turned off his phone, unable to bear the endless coverage. He didn't want to watch his father crumble, yet he knew it was inevitable. The empire was built on lies, and lies have expiration dates. He remembered Emma's words. You could lose everything. Maybe she was right, but what he'd gained, conscience, clarity, truth, felt heavier and purer than anything money could buy. One afternoon, as Daniel sat in a cafe, his phone buzzed again. A news alert. Emma Sterling interview, live tonight. He froze. She was finally speaking. When the broadcast began, her voice was steady but full of emotion. The truth doesn't destroy, she said. It reveals. And sometimes that's the only way to heal. Daniel smiled faintly. The world was listening to her now, not to him, not to his father, to her. That same night, he received a call. The name on the screen made his heart stop. Dad. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. But something inside him, a whisper of the boy who still wanted to believe, made him answer. Daniel. His father's voice said, tired, defeated, we need to talk. The tone wasn't commanding anymore. It was human, fragile, real. When Daniel arrived at the mansion, the lights were dim. His father sat alone in the study, surrounded by boxes, papers, and trophies that no longer meant anything. He looked smaller, his confidence stripped away. You came, he said softly. Daniel didn't answer. He just sat across from him, the silence between them heavier than ever. For the first time, there were no lies left to tell. Outside, the cameras flashed endlessly, recording the fall of a giant. Inside, a father and son faced the ruins of everything they'd built, a dynasty undone by a single act of truth. The collapse wasn't just financial, it was moral. And in the quiet that followed, Daniel understood something profound. Sometimes you have to watch everything burn to see what was real all along. Weeks passed, and the world moved slower, as if catching its breath after the storm. The Sterling name had become a warning, not a symbol. The once unreachable billionaire had vanished from the public eye, but whispers spread. He was preparing to speak. For the first time since the scandal began, he had agreed to a press conference. The same cameras that had worshipped him would now witness his fall. The day of the event, the media gathered like vultures around the conference hall. Lights, microphones, flashes, all aimed at one empty podium. Emma arrived quietly, escorted by Daniel. She hadn't wanted to come, but he'd asked her to. You deserve to hear it, he'd said. The room buzzed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. When the billionaire entered, silence fell like a curtain. He looked older, thinner, greyer, stripped of the armor of arrogance. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. I built my empire on the idea that I could control everything, he began. But control is an illusion. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when you try to bury it. His voice cracked on the last word. The audience leaned forward, waiting for the one thing he'd never given before: remorse. He took a deep breath, eyes lowering to the floor. "To my employees, my investors, and most of all, to Emma," he said, "I owe you an apology. Not for the mistake I made, but for the lie I told to hide it." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in on his face, raw, vulnerable, human. For the first time, the billionaire wasn't performing. He was confessing. Emma stood still, her heart pounding. She'd imagined this moment countless times. The apology, the acknowledgement, the closure. Yet hearing it didn't bring satisfaction. It brought peace. A small, unexpected peace. Daniel watched from the side, his jaw tight, his emotions unreadable. He had dreamed of this too. But for him, the apology was only half the story. Redemption required more than words. The billionaire turned toward Emma, his voice breaking. "You didn't deserve what I did to you," he said. "I took your integrity to protect mine, and in doing so, I lost both." Tears filled his eyes, glinting under the harsh studio lights. "If I could take it back, I would, but all I can offer now is the truth and my regret." He bowed his head. The room was silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Emma's hands trembled, but she stepped forward. The audience held its breath. She stopped beside him. Not close enough for forgiveness, but close enough for grace. "I don't need your apology," she said gently. "I just need you to be better." Her voice carried through the hall like a quiet storm. It wasn't anger that filled her eyes, it was strength. The billionaire nodded, tears slipping down his face. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had spent his life watching his father command rooms with power, but this quiet humility was the first time he saw him lead with humanity. Maybe for the first time, his father wasn't the billionaire. He was just a man, a flawed, fragile man, trying to face the weight of what he'd done. The press erupted in questions, flashes, and chaos, but Emma and Daniel walked out together, leaving the noise behind. Outside, the sunlight felt warmer, cleaner even. The crowd parted as she passed, phones raised not to mock, but to honor. In that moment, she was no longer the woman who had been humiliated. She was the woman who had endured. Inside the hall, the billionaire stood alone at the podium, staring at the empty chairs. The applause was gone, the empire too. But as he looked at the door his son had just walked through, he felt something unfamiliar. Relief. The truth had taken everything from him. But in its own cruel way, it had given him back his soul. Months passed, and the noise slowly faded. The world, hungry for new scandals, moved on. But some stories linger, not in headlines, but in hearts. Sterling Enterprises had a new CEO now, Emma. The woman once humiliated before millions now sat at the head of the very table where she was destroyed. Her first act as leader was simple. She replaced fear with fairness. The building felt different under her command. Gone were the whispers, the tension, the quiet terror that once filled the halls. In their place came laughter, collaboration, humanity. Employees spoke of her with respect, not obedience. On her office wall hung a framed quote, "Truth builds what lies cannot." Every visitor who entered the room left inspired and a little humbled. Daniel watched it all from a distance, choosing to step away from the empire completely. He had no interest in money or titles. He'd seen what they did to people. Instead, he worked quietly with charities his father had once ignored, focusing on rebuilding lives instead of legacies. When people asked about his family name, he only said, "It taught me the cost of silence." One evening, as the city glowed beneath the setting sun, Daniel visited his father. The mansion was quiet now. No assistants, no guards, no chaos, just a man and his regrets. The billionaire sat by the window, thinner, quieter, humbled. When Daniel entered, his father looked up and managed a small, tired smile. "You came," he said softly. They talked for hours, not about business but about life, the things they'd lost, and the lessons that remained. His father admitted, "I thought power was legacy, but it's not. Legacy is what people remember when you're no longer speaking." Daniel listened, a weight lifting from him he didn't realize he'd been carrying. Forgiveness didn't come through words, but through presence, the quiet act of simply being there. Before leaving, Daniel placed a folded newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Emma Sterling named most influential leader of the year." His father traced the letters with trembling fingers. "She earned it," he said. "Yes," Daniel replied, "she did." The silence that followed was peaceful, not the silence of guilt, but of understanding. When Daniel stepped outside, the air was cool, the sky painted in gold and grey. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was running from something. The truth had taken years from him, but it had given him purpose. He looked back at the house, its windows glowing faintly, and smiled. The empire might have fallen, but something better had risen in its place. Honesty. At the company, Emma gave a speech to her staff. "We can't rewrite the past," she said, "but we can decide what its lesson will be." Her eyes glimmered with quiet conviction. Behind her, a photo hung on the wall, the entire team smiling, no one above another. It was the image of an empire reborn, not of wealth, but of conscience. In time, history would remember the Sterling story, not for its fall, but for its transformation. People spoke of Emma's courage, of Daniel's integrity, of the billionaire's reckoning. It became a lesson passed down in boardrooms and classrooms alike. Truth costs everything, but it's worth the price. The scandal that once broke lives had instead built something unshakable. And as the city lights flickered against the horizon, Daniel walked past the Sterling building one last time. Its glass walls reflected not arrogance, but renewal. He whispered, almost to himself, "Legacies aren't built by power, they're built by truth." Then he disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind not a name to be feared, but a story to be remembered. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, take a second right now. Click like, because stories like this deserve to be seen. Comment below. Tell us what truth means to you. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove one thing: no empire, no lie, and no silence lasts forever. Because in the end, truth always finds its way home.